When I first started dabbling with web design about 15 years ago, I knew very little about it. There were very few courses or tutorials on the topic, and I had to learn a lot by myself. As a beginner, you'll probably be stuck around the same notions that I did many years ago, and you'll probably have the same questions. Like, how do I pick typefaces? How do I pick colors? How many colors? What about icons? How do I use them correctly? Where do I get them? What the heck is white space? How do I position elements correctly? How do I size them? Well, that's exactly the kind of information that you'll find in this course. But hey, if we're just meeting, my name is output000 and I'm a web designer from Romania. My goal is to help you become a better web designer and developer by creating content that's easy to follow and offers great value. I'm a big animal lover and I currently have 22 dogs and cats in my care, and my god, that number just keeps getting bigger and bigger. But that's enough about me. Let's talk about you and how this course can help you. First of all, it's a pretty big course. It has 36 lessons structured in 14 chapters. And I made it this long on purpose because I wanted to properly cover the fundamentals as well as some common patterns in web design. In terms of fundamentals, you're going to learn about color, typography, spacing, sizing, and imagery. In each of these lessons, we'll discuss the theory behind each concept. I'll show you some best practices and also a few tools that you can use to make your job easier. When it comes to common patterns, you'll learn about the various types of elements you can use to design a web page. Things like headers, hero areas, buttons, image galleries, contact forms, and more. Now, for each common pattern, we'll look at its definition and some use cases, and then we'll apply that knowledge to a demo project. And the demo project is a 3-page portfolio website that I designed specifically for this course. I won't show you the full design process, but instead, together, we'll design the various common patterns presented in the course. So, for example, when we're discussing headers, we'll first define what a header is. I'll show you some best use cases from live websites, and then together we'll design the header for the demo portfolio website. You'll also learn about project briefs and wireframes. I believe that every good website should start with these two elements because even before considering colors or typefaces, you need to know about the content of the website. Finally, we'll wrap up the course by learning about responsive web design. This is a crucial stage in any web design project, and I'll give you some general information to get you acquainted with the topic, and then we'll change the design of our portfolio website so that it looks good on smaller screens. We'll be working in Figma because it's awesome, it's free, and it's cross-platform. You can also use it in your browser, but any technique or principle that you learn in this course can be successfully used in other UI design software out there like Adobe XD or Sketch or any software that you plan. Now, throughout this course, I'll be using some third-party resources in the form of stock photos, UI kits, and logos. And most of these are downloaded from Envato Elements. Nowadays, this is my go-to place for these kinds of resources because on Envato Elements, you can get unlimited downloads of web templates, fonts, icons, and UI kits. That's millions of creative assets all ready to use and with simple commercial licensing. Plus, no lock-in contract means you can cancel anytime. Check out the link in the description to subscribe. Alright, so as I've been saying previously, in this course we'll be working on a demo project, and there will also be an assignment for you. Don't think about it as homework because nobody likes doing that, but instead as an opportunity to take what you learned during the course and putting it to good use, to practice, right? So first, let me show you the course project, and then we'll talk a little bit about the assignment. All right, so for the course project, we are designing a 3-page portfolio website for a nice chap called Robert Fox, who is a freelance UI designer and web developer. Now, obviously, this is a fictional character. This will be a fictional project brief, but I think it's going to be a great example for this type of course. So we need to design, as I said, 3 pages, a home page, an About Me page, and a contact page based on a project brief, which I'll show you very soon. All right, so let's see what's up with all these acronyms. UI, UX, web designer. What's their deal? How is a UI designer different from a UX designer? Are both web designers, or are they just something completely different? Let's find out. First, let's look at the term web designer. This refers to a person that is in charge of designing the front end of a website or web application. Front end meaning everything a visitor sees and interacts with. So for example, if I look at a website like Envato Elements, everything I see and everything I can interact with, like buttons and links, is the work of the web designer. That includes colors, typography, spacing, the shapes of elements, the information architecture, how I get from point A to point B, and so on. This is the front end. The back end is where you'll find the engine that drives this whole experience. You'll find the code, the databases, the files, and the scripts that transform a static design into a functional website or app. Now, the person that is responsible for the back end is called a web developer, or as it's called in some places, an engineer. So the web developer is in charge of the back end, while the web designer is in charge of the front end. I wanted to explain this difference because sometimes people employ a web designer and expect them to do everything, not knowing that it's not in their job description to build a website. Or vice versa, they hire a developer to do the design, logo, and coding. So you need to be careful, both as a client and as a professional, and you need to carefully define your boundaries so people can know what you can deliver. Anyway, we're getting a bit off topic. We were initially talking about UI versus UX versus web designer, and we defined the web designer. Now let's look at the other two. A UX designer is in charge of creating or designing the front end of a website or web app from a user's perspective. That means they need to understand what users want and what they need, and based on that, create a seamless experience, right? This is actually where the UX acronym comes from, user experience. So UX includes things like information architecture, user psychology, usability testing, content strategy, wireframes, interaction design, and so on. It's all the little things that you never know they're there if done properly. For example, information architecture, or how the content is structured within the website, right? If a user can very easily find the information they're looking for, then the information architecture is correct. The website is properly structured. So the UX designer did his job or her job properly. Here's another example. Let's say you want to test a service or app, and upon sign up, you need to fill in this form. Are you really going to stick around to fill in every single field? Most likely, no. However, a good UX designer will use this form instead, because there's no point in collecting every single information at sign-up time. An email address and a password is enough for now. The rest can be filled in later from the user account section. So when looking at both of these, which one are you more likely to use and complete the sign-up? Obviously, option B, right? So these are the kind of decisions that UX designers need to make, and often they work, from the shadows, so to speak, from behind the scenes, and don't always get the credit they deserve, but they do play a very crucial part. Now, a UI designer is also in charge of the front end of a web project, but covers aspects that relate almost exclusively to the visual appearance of the project. UI stands for user interface, so it's all about things like color, typography, spacing, sizing, shape, and so on. UI designers are usually responsible for taking the structures defined by the UX designers and dressing them up with the things that I mentioned earlier. So from choosing the shape of a button to how far apart elements should be to how thick or thin the headings should be, right? And of course, they need to do that while also keeping balance and making sure that the overall experience of the user is not damaged or compromised. So then, now that we defined what each term is all about, how do we use these in the same sentence? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. Both UI and UX design are two separate specializations within web design. There are areas of overlap between the two, of course, but in the end, they fall under the same umbrella term of web design. So it's also correct to say that you are a UX web designer or a UI web designer. It just means that you're a web designer that specializes in UX or UI or both. You can be a UI and a UX designer at the same time, which is great news for you because that just gets or increases your value as a professional. For example, I consider myself to be a web designer that specializes on the UI side of things, but I also have some knowledge on the UX side of things, which is something that I plan on improving in the future. All right, so with that said, let's take a look at some key takeaways. A web designer is in charge of designing the front end of a website or web application. A UX designer is in charge of creating the front end of a website or web app from a user's perspective. UX, which stands for user experience, includes things like information architecture, user psychology, usability testing, content strategy, wireframes, and interaction design. A UI designer is also in charge of the front end, but covers aspects that relate almost exclusively to the visual appearance of the project. UI stands for user interface, so it's all about things like color, typography, spacing, sizing, shape, and so on. Both UX and UI design are two separate areas of specialization within web design. It's correct to say that you're a UX web designer or a UI web designer, or both. All right, so hopefully that answered some of your questions regarding these three terms and the correct way of using them. Now it's time to move on and start discussing about some UX aspects of a web design project, and we'll kick things off with project briefs. Every web design project should start with the UX part, right? The user experience, because that's what we need to focus on. Even before considering colors or typefaces, we need to know about the structure of the website, and we need to know who we're designing for. And this is where a project brief comes in very handy. So for this application, we'll pretend we're the UX designer and we just had a talk with the client. Based on that talk, we created a project brief. So let me quickly walk you through it. You can find a link to this project brief in the a video description. So go ahead and download it. And let's see what we got. So we are designing a